Culberson. Oh, hello. There you are.
Better? There we
Perfect.
go.
Thank you.
I
Welcome.
don't need to sit so close, I guess. Brent Long, EMS Division Chief, Rapid City Fire Department. Before you today to ask for authorization to enter into the agreement to purchase a 2022 Demers Type 1 ambulance. The purchase price on this is $198,234.70. This is part of our ongoing vehicle replacement plan, and it was budgeted for in 2021.
Wonderful. Any questions? Great. Thank you, Mr. Long.
Thank you.
Okay, moving along. Number 2, Chief Hedrick. Welcome.
Hey, thank you, and good afternoon. So this is the Rapid City Highway Safety Grant. This is a grant that we've applied for many times over the years. We're pretty familiar with it, and it's something we've utilized to specifically focus in on speed enforcement and particularly DUI enforcement. So that's what we're looking at again here this year, is to utilize the funds to cover 2 police officer positions to be specifically focused in on speed and DUI enforcement. There is a 20% match to the city, and that's pretty common. It seems like that's been the match throughout the years. So if you're asking for the amount that the city would be on the hook for, it would be $27,000.
Okay. Mr. Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, as with all funding, are there any strings attached to this that we need to be aware of?
You know, there are things that we have to participate in, but it's stuff we typically, for the most part, do anyway. So, for example, the state will put together a week where they focus enforcement efforts on seat belts, or you know, if there's a event where the Highway Patrol and others are working together in collaboration on DUI enforcement, we would be expected to participate. So it's typically falls in line with stuff that we'd be doing anyways, and for us, it's been a good fit for some of these projects over the years.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you. So I whispered to the chief what the amount was. You said 27,000 would be the city's portion, right?
Correct.
And then how much would be the rest of the grant? I could do the math, but I'd rather not.
Right around 130,000, and so our portion would be 27,397.
Would that match come out of your budget or somewhere else?
Yes, that would be out of our budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, moving right along. Parks and Recreation, Director Beegler, 3 through 8, please.
Okay, thank you very much. Items 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are authorizations to enter into a lease or use agreement for the use of our various sports venues with 320 Baseball, Canyon Lake Little League, Rapid City Softball Association, Rapid City High School Baseball, and Black Hills Sports. Item number 8 is authorization request to sign a professional services agreement for the design work on our Dinosaur Park Accessibility Improvement Project.
Mr. Solomon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Beegler, thank you for the update. Dinosaur Park, so a lot of interest in that. What kind of timeline are we looking at for completion? Do you have any sort of estimate? This is the beginning, I know of it, but...
Correct. The design work would be done this year. It would go out to bid during the off-season, the off-construction season, with construction starting next spring.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Mr. Nordstrom.
Question for Mr. Bigler. On the 3 through 7 with these parks, or lease agreements, I should say, you're staggering them over several years. Is that normal?
It is, yes. We do have these as multi-year agreements. Rather than have to come to you every year to renew these, we do them on a multi-year basis, and it's better for everyone, including the group, to know that they don't have to come back every single year and renew this agreement. So it is standard, and this is the way that we've done them throughout the past.
Yeah, I think it simplifies things over here
It
on this
does,
side. too.
yes.
Yep, thank you, I yield.
Great. Thank you, Director Beegler. Moving
you.
right along, Finance, Director Sumption, 9 through 12, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Number 9 is standard for work comp purposes for our volunteers. Number 10, if you don't know yet, the airport is going into the parking business, and so this will allow for cash to be in a kiosk so people can pay for their parking at that kiosk. 11, this is our semi-annual update on fees. There are minimal changes. Parking leases are one of them. We increase by the CPI or 3%, whichever is less every year, so it amounts to $1 for each of the lots, with the exception of the Stockman lot. That one has been lower than all of our other surface lots since the beginning of time, but now that there's more going on in that activity or in that area, the usage has gotten higher, so we are proposing to put those at the same rate as our other surface lots. In addition, we're seeing where people are calling and asking us to cancel permits. We've already been charged for permits. We get charged through IPS, which is the company that we do the permitting through, and so we're going to have to deduct an administrative charge if they are wanting us to cancel their permits. In addition, there's a $250 plat. Let me find where I'm at here. Sorry, I had the wrong thing pulled up. A $250 for a plat transfer fee, and Fire and EMS is updating their current rates to be more in line with other areas as well as their current standards.
Pretty straightforward.
Number 12 then is the resolution levying assessment for the abatement of nuisances. It's debris pickup, that type of thing. I'm also going to point out items 29 and 30 are also dealing with me. 29, I give credit to Carla Kirschman from the Attorney's Office. She noticed that our election ordinance does not read the way it's intended to read, where we combine them at the first Tuesday after the first Monday. It currently just says the first Tuesday, which is not in line with our county elections, so this will align our practice with our ordinance. And then 30 is a supplemental appropriation there's the carryover for the CPI, or I want to say CPI, but CIP projects in there, as well as some reallocation in the drainage fund and the civic center. When we paid off and refinanced those bonds, we had to supplement the budget for that. And what's not on the agenda, but I do want to talk to you about, and I sent an email to both Lance and Laura, is the ARPA funding that has been coming out of the Biden administration for COVID-related projects. The guidelines came out on Monday of this week, meeting their 60-day requirement. Rapid City is set to receive just shy of $13,025,000 out of this funding. We will receive that directly from the Treasury as we are an entitlement community through the CDBG program. Allocations are based on population and census information. So that being said, that's another $13 million approximately that the city will be receiving. This money does have some restrictions on it, and some of it is to replenish or to supplement those organizations within the city that had a loss of revenue last year. So something that we could consider would be the Civic Center or the ambulance fund, where they can show that where they did not receive as much revenue as they did in the previous full year. Other things that we can use it on are water and sewer infrastructure specifically. That could be helpful in some of our projects that the Public Works Department is looking at. There's some broadband that's eligible for that as well. And I know Jim said that we could help with our broadband to get it up to standards. There's some other information in there that I'm still kind of getting through, but what I'm asking for, and I want on Monday's council meeting, is to authorize the mayor and finance office director to go ahead and apply for this funding, because we do still have to apply and sign something, and then to accept it when it's awarded. We should get about half of it this year and then half of it next year, and then we have to spend it, I believe, by 2024.
Can you send all of our council members an email with those guidelines and restrictions so we can absorb that as we kind of take all of these funds into consideration?
Absolutely.
We just need to have that hard, yep, okay. Mr. Solomon, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Pauline, you may or may not know the answer to this question, but it's similar to what I asked Chief Hedrick. Do you know of any strings attached to these funds of what we, not just what we can and can't use it for, but what is required of us in response to it, or?
So there will be some reporting requirements, and it will be audited. We're already audited every year anyway for our federal funding that we receive, so it's just going to be one more program that our auditors will have to take a look at.
So no, which audit requirements, I'm not worried about that because we have awesome people like you heading things up, but no other things from the federal government like, hey, cities have to operate this way or that way beyond what's typically recognized?
Not that I've seen yet, but like I said, I'm still kind of going through some of the paperwork yet.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Mr. Nordstrom?
Thank you. I've been reading through the same documents that Pauline is, and she's got the summaries, so she's way ahead of this on this. But she is correct about a lot of things on there, and she has got a lot of work to do to get this all set up for her. Just my reading through all of this, she's got a lot of history to go through, and so I totally understand why she isn't able to get through the whole entire document right now or right away, because it's about 151 pages of reading, and there's a big section in there that the finance director has to comply with. So good luck, Pauline. There's a lot of work.
All right, and to clarify, this will be attached to Monday's council meeting agenda. Okay, we clear? Great. Thank you very much.
But thank you.
Okay. Moving right along, Public Works, Director Tech. We have 13 through 25, please.
Speak to your item and if you have a question. Okay. Thank you, Madam President. Items 13 through 25. The first item is a request by Bill Casper to authorize the placement of veteran honor banners, I believe 224 of them. He's requested, and as we've identified the locations for that, so council needs to authorize that. He's here if you've got any questions for him. I don't know if you want to cover that right now or wait till I get through my items and then go back to it, or?
I think it's pretty straightforward. Mr. Casper, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Yes, thank you. I came asking for permission to use the new light poles that are downtown. Are being installed, and apparently Carla has told me it's a moot point because the reading reads all light poles downtown, so I guess they would be included, which is going to give us the capacity to double the number of banners that we put downtown. We'll be able to put up about 120 of those 225 right in the downtown area. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Casper. Continue, Mr. Tech.
Certainly. Item 14, standard change order. Item 15 is a amendment to professional services with Perkins & Will. They are the architectural firm that was selected for the Civic Center. As Director Balzer mentioned the other night about add alternatives back into the Civic Center project as the project's gone along. That's worked out well. Obviously, the design team has had to do designs to add those back in. So this is a contract to bring the alternate additional design effort up to the effort that they included on those. Item 16 is a standard project for our water system. 17 is a standard pavement rehab project we're requesting advertisement authority for. Items 18 and 19 are a request to purchase, actually it's 37 radios for rapid transit. Once again, the other night, we had a lengthy discussion about radios and how we're tied to the state system and how we're required to update those. So this, through rapid transit, is primarily grant funded, and then along with the CARES Act funding that we've received over the course of the last year, I believe our share is roughly 20,000, and we'll be able to pay for that out of our existing budget. So
that's 37 you need? On our agenda, it says 38.
correct. The agenda was incorrect.
Okay.
37. The
I didn't know if you
attachments
needed
all
an
say
extra
37.
one. Okay, all right.
We'll make sure this is corrected before
Okay.
council Monday night. Then we move on to item 20, purchase of water rights from the Hawthorne Ditch Company. They approached us about a couple years ago about obtaining their water rights. We made them an offer. They've accepted it. So that agreement is attached for that. We don't have a final dollar amount. We do have funding in our water fund to pay for the purchase of these water rights. We have to go through a process with the state of South Dakota to basically verify the rights that are there for purchase. So we'll get through that process eventually, and there'll be another item coming back to you in the future, I think, for the final amount. And then items 21 through 25 are sidewalk variances. The first one, item 21, is at it's a Hammerhead cul-de-sac, and the reason it says approved with stipulations is there's a portion of the sidewalk that they will be installing, but not all of it. So that's the difference between it and the other items, which are approval for one reason or another to not install sidewalks, primarily rural road sections, so it doesn't make sense at this time to install those sidewalks in the other 4 instances. Any questions on those items?
Mr. Nordstrom?
Mr. Tech, item 21, I had a question from the group called Live Well Black Hills. Did you get any public comment from them at all? Are you aware of it?
Did not.
Did not, okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Great, thank you, Director Tech. Moving right along, Community Development Act.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Number 26 is the annual narrative report of the CDBG funds utilized and the accomplishments achieved as compared to the goals, both 5-year and annual.
Any questions, comments from my colleagues? Okay, thank you, Ms. Schulke. Ms. Drew, go ahead.
It should be, yes.
Great, okay, thank you. Moving right along, City Attorney, Director Landine. 27? Mr. Tech? Oh,
Madam Chair.
yes, go ahead.
So the county regulations require that before they can create a road district on a street that's within the city's 3-mile plating jurisdiction, that the city council has to grant that approval. And you've done this routinely in the past.
Okay.
And the recommendation from the Public Works team is that this should be granted.
Thank you for that clarification. Moving along, 28. Confirming appointment of Rapid City Mayor, Council President as City Representative and alternate to the Rushmore Regional Railroad Authority. Pretty standard. Great. Go ahead, Mr. Evans. I think they're just looking for, well, I don't want to speak out of turn. Is there anyone that can give an official statement on it? I was told that this is what we should be doing and we should be attending these meetings. Probably just improving communications with the Railroad Authority. Go ahead, Mr. Jones.
Back when I lived in Lead, I remember when this was formed, it was a group that was formed to try to identify a way to run a railroad from the airport in Rapid City up to the Northern Hills. And it was a group of communities and multi-government agencies. They were trying to pursue having taxing authority in order to do this, to acquire land within X amount of feet on both sides of the railroad, et cetera. That's what they were created to do and what they attempted to do. What their status is right now, I don't know. But that's what their goal was to take and increase railroad service, to increase tourism through the hills, and to be able to assume and acquire property to do so. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Nordstrom.
Unless somebody on the staff has got some more addition, this is something that got created by the county, and it's been relatively dormant the last few years, so it needs to get started up again. And so with your appointment to that work group, that we'll be able to get some additional updates. What is taking place, what has taken place, which is pretty much next to nothing, and then the next step will be figuring out what are we going to do with the railroads, and especially the abandoned railroads. Thank you. And there's more information.
Great. Okay, one more meeting to go to. That'll be okay. All right. Moving right along, Director Sumption already addressed 29 and 30. Moving on to 31.
Madam Chair, item 31 is somewhat of a reorganization of the Community Development Department. As you know, we created a new TIF administrator position. We're trying to get that position filled now. And we have made the decision to move that in with the CDBG division under Michelle Schulke so that we have all our financial tools in the same division. Noting that, we're bringing forward a request to change the name of that division from the CDBG division to Community Enrichment Division. One of the other big changes is that we've created a new division, Planning Projects Division, and that will be headed by someone you're very familiar with, Sarah Hansel.
Great.
Sarah does specialty projects. You've seen many of them, the Affordable Housing Policy, ADU, Urban Commercial District, downtown parking, and it goes on. And so trying to specialize and keep her on task with those projects and not get her detoured, putting her in that specialized division, I think will benefit the city largely. And then based on the actions that you previously took at a couple of meetings ago, the Parking Operations Division is now being added to Community Development.
Great.
So we appreciate your support.
Okay. Thank you for doing that. Great idea. All right, moving right along, number 32. I believe we have City Attorney's Office just to expound on this a little bit more. It's on scooters, correct?
Good afternoon. Yes, this ordinance is to ban electric scooters from sidewalks in just the downtown central business district. That's the same area where we already ban skateboards and bicycles on the sidewalks. And the police department has actually put together just a real brief presentation to show you some pictures of the problems on those sidewalks. The reason we want to ban them is, one, to be consistent with our other ordinances, and two, there's just not enough room for both pedestrians, wheelchairs, which we have, accessibility obligations to them to make sure there's clear passage. So the state law changed during this recent legislative session, so if you do nothing, on July 1, electric scooters will be legal on sidewalks everywhere in Rapid City. So we're asking you to pass this ordinance to ban them just for the downtown sidewalks. Then they would be legal July 1 on other sidewalks outside of the central business district.
Go ahead, Kathy. I'll turn it over to Kathy Bach now.
So back in 2019, there was a Segway company that wanted to come to town, and at that time, the state statute did allow Segways on city sidewalks, so they would have been allowed in our downtown area, and we presented a safety plan that defined why that might not be a great idea in the downtown business district. And so I have just tweaked that presentation to today, so it just looks more congested because we got parking meters downtown. So so how much space is needed for pedestrians? I'm not a traffic engineer, but This is just some points. How much space do you want to comfortably move downtown? How much space is needed when there's a wheelchair involved? How much is needed when multiple wheelchairs are involved? Experts say 3 to 5 feet is required for ADA requirements. The city currently has an ordinance that prohibits bicycles and skateboards on sidewalks in the downtown area, which facilitates the safe movement of pedestrians on our congested sidewalks. And so we're, again, like Jess said, we're just asking to add the motorized electric scooters to that ordinance. So there's 17 sidewalk cafes in the downtown core. Several of these create some additional obstructions due to trash cans or light poles or meters, and so it just shortens the distance. There's some measurements in there. This one actually has 5.5 feet between the meter and the sidewalk cafe. There's several other examples: Kathmandu, Thirsties, and Ifrits. So I think it goes anywhere from 5.6, this is like an eye exam, 5.6 to 5.2. And here's some more sidewalk cafes that even have less distance, 3.7, 4.9, and I made that other one too small. I can't read it. Some other unique sidewalks that are downtown. This is in front of Roaming Around. So there's 4.9 down the ADA accessible ramp. And then if you go down below, which there's steps involved, there's a little bit of walkway there, but the meters create some additional obstructions. Construction creates added obstructions. So this is in front of Firehouse, where they're doing some sidewalk repairs, and pretty much every year there's some form of construction going on in the downtown core. This is an example of the railing out front of Murphy's that creates a little bit more of an obstruction, 3.2 feet between the railing and the meter, and then of course the presidential statutes that are on the corners. So in conclusion, having motorized vehicles outside the congested area downtown is definitely possible. This would not exclude them from being outside the downtown core. It is much more difficult in the downtown core along Main and St. Joe, as they're utilized as one-way traffic with 3 lanes of traffic in each direction. There were ideas of closing Main Street and St. Joe to vehicular traffic. There is also ideas of closing lanes to create bike lanes or pedestrian walkways. This will take some creativity and some compromise in order to make it occur. So I did put an example in here of the bike lane and the pedestrian lane on Kansas City Street. Since I put this on here, I've spoke to the traffic engineer and Kip Harrington with long range planning, and this is like really not a design that works very well anymore, and so pedestrians and bicycles get confused on which side they're supposed to be on. And if we did have meters down Kansas City, which if we did this down on St. Joe, we would have meters, you have pedestrians in the bike lane trying to maneuver the meters while bicycles are going by them. And if you fed a meter, you realize you have to be on the sidewalk side to feed the meters, so you're even more in the bike lane. And Kip did tell me that the 2020 bicycle pedestrian plan does talk about separate bike lanes, and the way that the communities are going is traditionally bike lanes are on the roadway surface now. And if that were the case, then electric scooters and motorized things like that would be allowed in those bike lanes. But as it currently exists today, it would create a traffic hazard or pedestrian hazard.
Got 3 people with questions: Mr. Solomon, Mr. Jones, and then Ms. Drew. Oh, Mr. Stroman.
Very good. I guess I'm going first. Thank you for the presentation. I think it's common sense not to allow these downtown, but it's cool to allow them outside of that. So for clarification's sake, based on your sign and what you just said, if somebody did want to have a scooter downtown on the sidewalk-ish, is it Kansas City Street, or is it Columbus or Quincy? How far out does this extend?
I believe the Central Business District is Columbus. It's always the one Rapid City High School is on, I remember. I believe that's Columbus Street down to Omaha, and then West Boulevard to...
East Boulevard?
East Boulevard, yeah.
The OG
Yeah.
That's what we call that. Okay. I just wanted to make sure it was clear in that when we communicated that to the public, they may just assume it's St. Joe and Main Street. So that probably will have to be clearly communicated. But we've been down this road a little bit before. I know that, I think we passed something, segways or something like that, and then you had to override it? Is that?
I think that was a business that just decided that it wasn't going to be conducive to be downtown.
Yeah.
And so they did not start a business
Okay.
downtown.
Well, it's common sense. I'll support what you're doing here. Thank you.
Great, Mr. Jones.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So the ordinance will state the word certain motor vehicles. Is that going to be defined enough to where someone can't come in and split hairs and say, well, this is and this isn't, or is there a good definition?
Thank you. Yeah, that is a good question. And the reason we use that terminology is, one, it's already defined elsewhere in our Rapid City Municipal Code, but also we want it to be broad because we had the Segway issue and now the state legalized just a very narrow electric scooter. But since we have these safety issues with everything other than pedestrians and wheelchairs on the sidewalks, we want it to be broad so that if someone invents some new electric vehicle we're not thinking of, we don't have to bring it back to you every time. So that was intentionally broad, and yes, it is defined as essentially anything that's not self-propelled, I believe is the definition.
Great, thank you. And then a follow-up, if I may. These certain motor vehicles, they are street legal, aren't they, at this time? Scooters and others, or is there just no place for them in the downtown or street area?
I did a small research project on that, and that's super complicated, but no, they would have to modify them to make them street legal. They don't have the proper brake system, they don't have the proper rear view mirror, they don't have the proper, there's a whole bunch of things that you have to have when you're on the roadway, just like you have to do to your four-wheeler to make it street legal, and it's quite complicated to make an electric scooter that way. That's what we ran into when we did have an electronic scooter company show up in town a year ago, and they couldn't be on the sidewalk because of state statute, and so the answer was go on the street. And we have several definitions of state statutes and city ordinances that do not allow them in the street.
So as is, they would not be allowed to use the bike lane on the street either then?
I think a bike lane is different, but not a roadway with vehicles.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Drew.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, he kind of covered what I was going to look at, the writing in the street. How about in the alleys? Can they ride down the alleys if they want to avoid that kind of, I mean, we're going to have it. If they're going to be out not in the corridor, they're going to take alleys.
We'd have to look into that for sure, but I would think they wouldn't maneuver very well through an alley. These are little bitty tire scooters that
I've seen them.
You hit potholes and stuff, you're going to probably...
They allowed them in Minneapolis, I mean, on the sidewalks. And the problem was they had those rentals, and it wasn't the kids that ruined them, it was the adults that hated them that take them and trash them. But they did allow that in Minneapolis. So I think that, if we look at other towns that can somehow work this out, and it seems like it's coming in the future, maybe it's something you kind of think down the road, how can we accommodate this? And right now we say no, but it's not no forever. And we can think of ways that we can accommodate these new forms of transportation. I loved the Segway idea for tours and things like that, to tour our presidential statues, that kind of an idea really appealed to me, but we just couldn't make it safe. But I see that Joel is up at the, so Joel Landine, what you got?
I would just say an alley is a street, so if it's not street legal, it's not alley legal. Plus, if you try to allow it on the alley, I'm trying to figure out how you would get to the alley or continue on the alleys without going on the streets or sidewalks at some point. I know you're right. A lot of large cities have dealt with this, and it hasn't all been good. I remember over the last couple of years, I go to Phoenix every year in Scottsdale, and one year I went and they had these rental bikes all over, and they were all the rage, and you could just put your card in and your phone app and rent a bike. And people were leaving them all over and causing tons of problems. But what really killed them was the scooters came in. So the next year I went to Phoenix, you didn't see any bikes and you saw little motorized scooters everywhere. And people were zipping down the sidewalks at 15, 20 miles an hour. And next time I went to Phoenix, there wasn't scooters on the sidewalks in downtown Scottsdale anymore. So, you know, they've had to address these, but part of the problem is in a lot of large cities, I think like Minneapolis or downtown Denver, it's built for a lot of pedestrian traffic. They have wider sidewalks, they have more clearance, and, you know, because of the way our downtown developed and now, you know, trying to accommodate, I think, the businesses. I mean, honestly, if you were gonna do it and design it from scratch, you would give more clearance between some of our outdoor spaces outside our businesses in the street. But that really isn't feasible at that point. I think you're right in that as we move forward and look at street projects and projects downtown, we have to start considering some of these things. But the other reality we'll have to face is there's only so much space between the buildings on Main and St. Joe, and how much of that are you going to dedicate to traffic, and how much are you going to dedicate to parking, and how much are you going to dedicate to sidewalks and spaces outdoor, because there's only a limited amount. So that's going to be an expensive change, and there's a lot of competing interests. So.
Well, we're trying to actually grow our city core, you know, so we're expanding that to the east. So we're going to have people that are going to take their little scooters from the School of Mines and drive to the center and then maybe go for coffee, whatever. All I'm saying is, you know, we can say no now, but let's plan a route. Let's think about a way that people can get from east to west on those bikes with safety. And because it's going to happen, and it's not going to happen within the next couple of years, but I do see it being more and more a favored form of transportation that's very cheap. You know, so just thinking for the future, like Bill was doing the other night, you know, we like to think that we could be welcoming of that kind of new transportation for students, because we're going to be a college town. That's what we made a big deal about. Let's be a college town. Well, the college kids are going to want these scooters. Thank you. I yield.
Okay, Mr. Stroman, then Mr. Evans.
Thank you. I have a couple questions about the core area. That it says in here, the central business district as defined by chapter 10.04 of this code. And are you fairly accurate on the Columbus to Omaha? And I just want to be clear on it, because I don't think there's a lot of businesses around Columbus Street. And the second thing is it just the south side or the north side of Columbus Street, or is it the south side too? So if Johnny, third grader, is riding his bike home from Wilson, is he going to get a ticket? I need some clarification on the geographics of it. And also, is it 24/7? Is it going to be all day, every day, or is it going to be just during business hours?
Well, I can tell you that the timing, it's all the time, that we don't set aside specific times. I don't know if it specifies the north side or south side of the streets. I don't have that language in front of me, but it is Columbus to Omaha, East Boulevard to West Boulevard, and that's the same district that we've had defined for our skateboards and bicycles. And I can tell you, as far as enforcement with those two, generally, if you see a skateboarder downtown just during a Wednesday afternoon, if the police see him, they'll give him a warning. When they write tickets, as someone who's prosecuted those tickets, it's during like summer nights when it's really a safety issue. So in terms of prosecution, they're pretty reasonable about just telling people, hey, by the way, in the downtown district, you can't do that, you know, please walk away. But if it's a problem, if there's an event downtown and it is actually a safety concern, that's when they actually write the tickets. And we did, as far as the geographic boundaries, we just wanted it to be consistent so that people in town learn, in this area, you can't do anything but walk on the sidewalks unless you're in a wheelchair, essentially.
Okay, thanks. That's all I have.
Mr. Evans?
To extend what Ms. Drew and Mr. Stroman just said, as a person who rides bike a lot and does it here and in other cities, we got to make sure we're not too restrictive, because we're just trying to open up a lot of new housing units right there along Kansas City. Those are people that are going to be on bikes. And now they may be choosing that spot because I can jump on my bike and I can be downtown in 2 seconds and be back. And we don't want to do that. So I would suggest the limits are kind of what I've been doing my whole life. From, say, 5th Street to 9th, either Columbus or Kansas City, and down to Omaha. But to take that whole original town side area and include that as a risk And let's not kid ourselves. For a city this size, built when it was, our sidewalks, our street right-of-ways are wide. They're wider than Sioux Falls, they're wider than Casper, they're wider than most towns built during this period. So we got a lot of space to play with. And part of that is used up with diagonal parking, which most of these places don't do. So let's not overreact here. I would suggest before we pass this, we limit it from 5th Street, where there really is congestion, on down to 9th. So we're not saying you kids at Tech, leave your bikes at home. It's going to take you 10 minutes to walk, which should take a minute. So that's my suggestion. Thank you.
Mr. Weifenbach?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think someone needs to notify Governor Nome that there's a warrant out for her arrest for riding a scooter on the sidewalk downtown.
Oh. Is that your comment?
No, I think that Alderman Drew and Alderman Evans and Alderman Stroman are pointing out some good points that the grand opening not a grand opening, but to start the project that the property mill is doing, those guys ride scooters. The younger generation of people are looking for different modes of transportation in and amongst. And one of the things about the downtown core is that livability that I think that they're alluding to here. And these guys, they put the shovel in the ground and they had their little scooters out on the sidewalk. They didn't even know they were breaking the law. They ride their scooters inside their buildings and stuff, and it's a phenomenon that some of these people are doing to get around downtown. I think that we're going to be real restrictive here by eliminating all the streets downtown. That'd be my input on it, so I think it'd be best to proceed cautiously on this and consider that. And I've been in the communities that have electronic scooters. If you go to Europe or overseas or whatever, bicycles have half the right of way, man. So they'll run right over a pedestrian there. So I'm just thinking, looking forward, that maybe we should proceed cautiously with this. If there's a lot of problems with it, I could agree to it, but I think that I don't want to eliminate that culture of people that actually have modes of transportation. Skateboards, a lot of young people use them to travel around the community. A lot of them use these little scooters. So that'd be my comment, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Solomon?
Thank you. Great comments. Good conversation. I think one thing I got out of this conversation is that what if we change the boundaries? Is that a problem? What if you kept it kind of contained a little bit more to start with and see how that goes, and then you can grow out the full business district if it was an issue, but if it proves not to be an issue. So you could say 5th to 8th Street or something like that, and West Main Main and St. Joe, something along those lines.
To your point, I think we could redefine the districts, and I would advise that you do it for everything, so that skateboards are consistent with scooters, with bikes, so that everything is banned from the same area, so that people don't have to learn, well, I can ride my skateboard on these streets, but my scooter on these streets, and the sidewalks. Do you know what I mean? So I think if you're talking about redefining the ban for everything, certainly we could do that.
I think it's just interesting part of the conversation. I'm not sure what's right or wrong. I do think there are parts of our downtown that having scooters go by is not a good idea. And I think that's common sense. But I think there are other parts that clearly it is wide open. And I don't want nobody to really come downtown when there's alternate ways to travel. I think a lot of this just makes the point of our consideration of potential bike lanes downtown, which means we would probably lose a lane of traffic or parking, or one or the other. But I think it's worth discussing maybe what those boundaries might be and coming to a compromise on that.
And
Thank
Vicki
you.
Fisher wants to weigh in as well, if that's okay.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Madam Chair. So when we look at the central business district, which is really where this boundary is trying to follow, the fact that graphics were shown identifying sidewalk cafes, I can appreciate the conflict where you would have a scooter on a sidewalk with a cafe, parking meters, etc. But if you look at the ordinance, even for the central business district, where sidewalk cafes and other appurtenances in the sidewalk are allowed, it's only on those sidewalks that are a minimum of 10 feet in width. And that does not include all of the streets within the central business district. So maybe if we looked at where that physical improvement of 10-foot wide sidewalks, what that boundary was, and then see where we can pull back the boundary of where we would want to limit scooters.
John Roberts. Great. Mr. Roberts?
Thank you, Council President, and this really is scaring me when I agree with Bill Evans so much. I don't know what's going on here, but but I do agree. I think that we're over limiting where we can do this. I like Jason's idea of Main and St. Joe, and I would say from 5th Street to probably 9th Street, because if you look at the downtown business core itself, that's pretty much where most of the retail businesses are. And one of the things that I was thinking of is when Mr. Evans was talking about the new apartments on Kansas City, those people, if they're riding scooters or they're riding bikes and they want to go to the YMCA, they'd have to go up 3 blocks by law to be able to go around that, so they're not breaking the law, just making a path to the YMCA. So I think that we do need to make this cohesive to the people that want to use bicycles, scooters, whatever. I don't see an issue with limiting the downtown core where most of the retail is, but I think that we should all take a good look at where we should limit it and limit it as much as we possibly can to limiting it. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you, Madam President.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add that we have several regional models, and there's sometimes that it's good to not be first in line because we can see what works and doesn't work. And I got to tell you, last weekend in Lincoln, those bike lanes are a nightmare. They've got separate stoplights, and the lights come on, and it was confusing. And with our tourist traffic, I would see would almost create more of a hazard because, frankly, I didn't know when I was supposed to go with some of these lights. So we need to study these towns, and I think Fort Collins has got a lot of the same stuff, and see what works and what doesn't work before we come up with anything. I do think it's the wave of the future. We need to do it, but we have the great, advantage of not doing it first and doing it wrong and have to redo it again. So we can look at what's working and what isn't. Thank you.
Mr. Jones?
Thank you. Very briefly, we love to see foot traffic downtown going in and out of our stores, and we encourage that. We want that to happen. If more things are going to be zipping up and down the sidewalk, we need to be careful, because when Mrs. Old Lady gets hit by a scooter when she's coming out of the olive oil store, there's going to be a lot of trouble and issues about liability and et cetera and et cetera. So crowded sidewalks are good for business, and we need to make sure we keep all of those users in mind before we would jump in to allow something like this to happen. Thank you.
I think that was good discussion. I think that gives us some time to work on this between now and Monday. Good discussion. Okay. Thank you. Okay, we'll move right along. 33 and 34. 33 being the plan duration for the next round of vision funds. I think we received a letter from the mayor. Came to us via email. And then confirming the appointments, which we will address these both on Monday. Any question, discussion? Pretty straightforward. Great. And now we have a presentation from Director Tech.
Could I add one thing before I go into the presentation? Point of privilege here. Can we replace that mic? It's been bugging me for at least a month. It doesn't work right. Throw it away, get a new one, check the channel, whatever's going on with that. It's not an expensive fix. As an audio person, I hate it. So,
Darla, I think the problem was I kept forgetting to turn it on.
no, it's not it.
Darla, if I may.
Yes?
We do have a CIP line item that is going to replace the entire audio system in here with the new Shure wireless system.
Great. Can I borrow a mic to you until that gets done? Because I got plenty of them at home.
The problem with this one is it's so old that replacing it is actually more expensive than we should.
Yeah, I get it. It is old. So that, anyway,
All right, we have
thank
a
you.
solid
That's
waste
it.
master plan update presentation. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. I'm Stacy Titus, the Operations Management Engineer for Public Works and the Project Manager for the Solid Waste Master Plan. The project team is here today to provide an update on the work that has occurred on the master plan. In June of 2020, Council authorized the solid waste master plan. Stakeholders, who we'll introduce here in a little bit, were engaged and started meeting with the project team in December of 2020. And thousands of hours of work and many meetings have occurred, and we're now at a good point to update the council on the efforts of the master plan. Today's presentation will consist of 9 parts. Some of them will be very brief, so don't get too worried about the 9 parts. First part is going to be an overview of the solid waste division. We'll then discuss drivers and key objectives of the master plan. We'll introduce the team. We'll summarize the planning process. We'll move into some key plan recommendations. We'll discuss the cost of services, a rate adjustment approach, present a rate adjustment recommendation, and then discuss where we go from here, the next steps. At this time, I'd like to introduce Jeff Barber, the solid waste superintendent, and Jeff will give a brief overview of the solid waste division and his workforce. Jeff?
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Barber. I'm the Rapid City Solid Waste Division Superintendent. The Rapid City Solid Waste Division is divided into 3 parts, 3 different divisions. We have the landfill, which is run by Dan Roth. He's the landfill supervisor. We take in annually 170,000 tons. 40,000 of that is diverted between recycling, asphalt, concrete, dirt. So we landfill about 130,000 tons annually. We have about 500 vehicles on average on a daily basis coming through the front gate. Dan has 12 employees, including the scale house and his mechanics. The second division is the MRF co-compost. The MRF takes in about 180 ton a day to grind. So it's 46,800 tons through the MRF per year that is ground run through into co-composting with about a 30% recovery rate on the co-compost. The third division is run by Josh King. That's the collections. We have 6 trash routes per day with 750 to 850 stops per route per day. 3 recycling routes per day with 1,400 to 1,600 stops. With a 30% set-out rate, there's probably 70% less stops, but they still have to go through the motions, through the streets. We run 2 trucks a day that service all 6 routes for the curbside yard waste. We have 3 remote drop sites, Fitzgerald, North, and 24/7 at the landfill. And with that, on a weekend we run 4 trucks with about 107.4 tons per day on the weekends that we have to haul. During the weekday we run 2 to 3 trucks hauling 35 to 40 tons per day. And that's about all I got. Any questions? Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. There are 4 main drivers in the master plan. We wanted to look at the aging infrastructure and the equipment. The photos directly to the right of the text there illustrate or are good examples of the age of the equipment out at the solid waste facility. Much of this equipment is at the end of its design life and is in need of repair and replacement. The next driver was the future capital investment needs for the solid waste facility and operations. The next would be the finite remaining landfill capacity. And this is illustrated by the figure on the far right. The existing permitted facility is what's shown. The items in pink are closed municipal solid waste cells that have been filled up and are now closed. The areas in the yellow highlight are our current active municipal solid waste disposal cells. And then the two cells in the top left and the bottom right that are outlined in red are yet to be opened, future cells for the facility. And the fourth item, or the fourth driver, was the short-term and long-term planning needs for the solid waste operations. There were 4 key objectives that the master plan identified. The first was to evaluate and analyze the solid waste division's operations and financial health of the organization, address the critical short-term needs for the solid waste division. Third, provide key information for stakeholders and city policymakers, yourselves, to provide direction on critical program decisions. The fourth area was to develop a plan that provides guidance for the successful long-term solid waste operation. This time, I'd like to acknowledge the key project team members for the Solid Waste Master Plan. First, I'd like to take an opportunity to acknowledge the city staff. Dan Kuhn, Assistant Public Works Director, for his guidance and leadership in the starting of the Master Plan project. Jeff Barber, the Superintendent, and critical for the operations and guidance for the Solid Waste Division. Dan Roth, as Jeff mentioned, Landfill Supervisor, Josh King, Collection Supervisor, and Lucas Hartshorn, Supervisor for the Material Recovery Facility. In addition, I'd like to give a thank you to Tori Fields and Jancy Knight, who were instrumental in gathering lots of data and financial information for the master plan team. The stakeholders, at this time, I would like to personally thank them for their guidance and willingness to give up their time to serve as a stakeholder for this important project. Alan Anderson is in the audience here. He's a stakeholder. Appreciate his guidance and expertise. Chad Golick with Sanders Sanitation is a team member. And then Alderman Stroman, Lehman, and Weifenbach, thank you for your assistance. At this time, I'd like to introduce Luke Rodick and Bob Craigs with Burns and McDonald to introduce their team and talk about their group. And I believe Jason Hines with FMG, who's a sub-consultant, is here in the audience as well. Thank you, and with that, here's Luke.
Thank you, Stacy. As Stacy mentioned, Luke Rodick, Burns and McDonald Project Manager and Senior Solid Waste Engineer with Burns and McDonald out of our Sioux Falls office. Have a lot of experience with solid waste engineering and planning projects. We also have a very experienced national team of dedicated solid waste professionals, one of which is here today as well, Bob Craigs. And we also have, not listed up there, a deep bench of support staff that have been really carrying this project forward. Also highlighting, following what Stacy said, we teamed with FMG Engineering, and they're our local partner, and Jason Hines has been leading the effort from their end. And so I guess, Bob, if you want to introduce yourself at this time and provide a little more background.
So good afternoon. Thanks for your time today. As Luke said, I lead the solid waste and resource recovery consulting practice for Burns and McDonald. I've been working with local governments for almost 30 years. I know I don't look that old, but I am. So we appreciate the chance to be here. We've done a lot of master plans. I'm a planner by trade, and we look forward to talking with you about the planning process and our recommendations.
Thanks, Bob. All right, moving on. So before we get into some of the key outputs from the master plan project, we wanted to provide an overview of the master planning process. And so this slide really walks through the timeline and approach to how we've gotten to this point today. The project kicked off really in July of last year with an extensive data gathering phase, both on the city's team side, like Stacy alluded to, and also on the Burns & McDonnell side. And then once the data was collected, organized, and reviewed, we then got together with the stakeholder group for the first stakeholder workshop, where we really introduced them to this project, presented some initial findings to the group, and then just discussed kind of the next steps and responsibilities from the stakeholder groups and for the rest of the project. From there, we moved into a detailed operations analysis phase, and then also developed the baseline cost of service. Again, at this point, we circled back with the stakeholder group and presented the baseline cost of service analysis. We presented key recommendations and also gathered key input and feedback from the stakeholder group on critical program issues. So carrying forward based on direction from the stakeholder group, we went into a detailed scenario evaluations phase where we looked at different recommendations and different operational changes and what the impact of those scenarios had on the cost of service as well as rate impacts. And so once we gathered that information, we recently met again with the stakeholder group in April and presented the recommended scenario and then discussed the rate adjustment options and approach with them. And so based on consensus from that workshop with the project team as well as the stakeholder group, we're now bringing forward those recommendations to council here today. And so that's where we're at now with the project. So moving into the key plan recommendations, as Jeff outlined, the solid waste division's broken out into the 3 operating units: landfill, MRF, and collections. The recommendations for the landfill, there's been recommendations for airspace utilization improvements, site traffic flow, and scale queuing issues. And we've also identified a need to implement a commercial yard waste tipping fee in the future. I will note that all of the starred recommendations will be discussed on separate slides in more detail following this slide. Moving on to the material recovery facility and co-compost recommendations. So there is consensus to continue with the current recycling services, continue waste grinding and biosolids mixing as a way to manage the biosolids coming from the wastewater plant, as well as get the benefits of volume reduction with grinding of the waste before it's landfilled. And then main recommendation here is discontinuing the co-composting process, which Bob will go into more detail here on the next slide for that recommendation. On the collection side, there's a handful of recommendations here. First being a need for a new recycling route, just due to the growth of the city and the amount of customers utilizing that recycling service. There's also a need for improved GPS and route management software within the collection vehicles. There's a recommendation for phasing out of the 35-gallon carts for the collection. And then there's also alley collection improvement recommendations, which we'll discuss a little more further. And then consolidating 2 of the current remote drop-off sites to 1 centralized staffed remote drop-off site for residential yard waste and recyclable collection is one of the key recommendations that we'll discuss on a following slide. There's also an overarching recommendation for all of the operating units, and that's to address the baseline needs of the operations. So that includes adequate staffing resources, funds for scheduled equipment replacement, and then also budget for basic capital improvement projects to really just to continue operations and maintaining the same level of services that the city currently provides and maintaining regulatory compliance. With that, I'll turn it over to Bob to discuss in a little bit more detail some of these key recommendations.
Thank you, Luke. So as Luke outlined, I'm going to address some of the key recommendations and provide you with a little bit more specific information. So the existing Rapid City Solid Waste Facility is unique as shown in the diagram in that it has a co-composting process. And to be clear, that is different from your yard waste composting process. So our recommendation to discontinue the co-composting process does not impact your yard waste. And also, as Luke said, we're also recommending continuing of operating the materials recovery facility, which is the recycling facility. So the background in terms of our recommendation concerning co-composting is originally set up to divert materials from being landfilled. The challenges include, as suggested there, being able to produce a marketable product, a product that can be sold or a product that can be given away. It's very difficult, and at this point in time, it doesn't seem feasible without a substantial financial investment. And in our work, we did a cost of service study, as Luke alluded to, where we looked specifically at all of the costs associated with the various programs to get a sense of the operational cost. And we also took a look at the facility itself, and to continue to move forward with the co-composting process, it would require a substantial capital investment, both today and over the long term, of millions of dollars. So at this point in time, we're recommending that you discontinue the co-composting process itself. The next slide, I wanted to touch upon, as Luke outlined, the collections recommendation. So those photos are of the drop sites. As you can see, there's a lot of material that's not in the containers, and there's a lot of contamination. Those sites are presently well used, and they are not staffed. And as Luke and Stacy outlined, you have 3 drop sites which provide collection of yard waste as well as old newspapers, cardboard, and commingled containers. But as you can see there, there's a lot of contamination. So the concerns there for you as council members and as a city is you can provide this service, but there's also other operational changes that you should consider, we would recommend. There's safety concerns. The contamination issues result in excess operational cost for the city staff. It has to be looked upon and addressed multiple times a day. So what we're suggesting is that you establish a centralized drop-off site. You discontinue the 2 remote sites, and the centralized drop-off site would have specific hours it would be open, it would be fenced in, and it would be staffed. And it would be encouraged that residents presently use the site. What we're seeing based on our conversations with staff is that many businesses are also using the site. That results in the site being overused and at times more yard waste there than really should be for the size of the site itself. So in summary, we're recommending that you centralize a 1 drop-off site, and this would accommodate, basically, we feel, the citizens, and also, to be clear, the drop-off site at the landfill would continue. The third key recommendation has to do with the operation of the landfill. The photo itself provides you with a picture back to the yard waste composting, which is where I started. The present operations at the landfill receive more than 10,000 tons a year of yard waste from commercial haulers. That's above and beyond what residents presently bring to the landfill. The present fee structure is that there's no charge for commercial haulers or residents to bring their yard waste to the landfill. The rationale for discounted fees or no fees is consistent with other cities to encourage diversion. But at this point, the cost of service to provide the composting, receiving, and processing of yard waste is extensive for those 10,000 tons from the commercial haulers. So we're suggesting upon setting up your centralized drop-off site for yard waste that the city consider in the future establishing a tipping fee. Tipping fee is the term that solid waste consultants use for the fee that you charge. Establish a tipping fee for those that are bringing yard waste into the site and specifically focus on the commercial haulers. So those are 3 key recommendations, and I'll turn it back over to Luke and we'll talk about our cost of service analysis.
All right, so the cost of service really ties all of the operations and these key recommendations together. And with the main objective being to develop short-term and long-term financial plans for the City Solid Waste Division. As part of the cost of service, we allocate the cost of current city services to the appropriate customers and identify areas where there's customer rate under recovery or over recovery, and then assess the need for rate adjustments for those areas. And this leads into the rate approach to really develop cost of service driven rates. So you pay for what you're using and what the cost of that service is. So for the rate adjustment approach that in the recommendations that we're presenting today, the proposed rate adjustments are going to recover the baseline needs like we've discussed. So that's your basic capital improvements. It's the required staffing resource changes, also adequate funds for scheduled equipment replacement, and then accounting for the operational modifications such as discontinuing the co-composting process and the other recommendations that we've presented already. So for the approach to these rate adjustments, we looked at adjusting residential rates to meet the actual cost of service for the residential collection component in operation, and then adjusting the landfill rates for inflation was the approach that we used to come up with these recommended rate adjustments shown on this slide. So to clarify these charts up on the screen, the top table identifies the actual adjustment amount that is being proposed. So for the residential row, those adjustments are based on the monthly billing rates for residential collection. And then for the landfill row, the adjustments are based on the landfill tipping fee in $1 per ton unit. And so as you can see, the initial adjustment on the residential side is proposed at $3, followed by $2 adjustments annually after that. And for the landfill tipping fee adjustment, it would be initially a $2 adjustment, and then followed by another $2 adjustment in 2023. The bottom table actually presents what the actual proposed rates will be with those adjustments included. And so for the residential rates, it's broken up by the container size for each customer. And so the rate adjustments are included in these rates. I will point out that for the 35-gallon container in 24 and 2025, the reason there's no rates shown is that it's planned to phase those carts out by 2024. For the landfill row, the tipping fee is shown as $61 with that initial $2 adjustment, and then it'd be $63 in 2023 with that other adjustment. The next 2 or 3 slides will really provide some additional background and context for how we've come up with these proposed rate adjustments. So this slide really just shows the historic perspective of the Rapid City rates, and this is just based on the 65-gallon container cost to simplify things. As you can see, from 2012 to 2013, there was actually a rate adjustment that reduced the collection rates, and then there's been no change since then. The blue bars on the right side of the screen from 2021 through 2025 represent our proposed rates as shown on the previous slide. The dashed line going across the top of the bars there represents the rates if they had been adjusted or just kept up with the CPI inflation, which is about 1.6% annually for the last 10 years. The orange bar actually represents a inflation rate for a solid waste specific index. And so as you can see, the costs of the solid waste industry have actually outpaced just the general CPI inflation factors, and so the costs are higher. And I guess the main thing to get across on here is the proposed rates are in line with those inflationary adjustment factors going forward. So this slide shows a perspective of how the City of Rapid City's rates compare to other benchmark cities in this region. And so as you can see currently, the current city rates are the lowest in the region there, shown by that top light blue bar. And even after the first 2 proposed adjustments, the city rates as shown there for fiscal year 2022 are still in that lower tier of rates compared to these other cities. One other thing to point out with this is that the city is currently providing a higher level of service for their collection program, as most of these other cities do not include yard waste curbside collection. And so that is another service above and beyond that the city is currently providing compared to these other benchmark cities.
Luke, I apologize, Richie over here. I apologize. I've got another meeting to get to, but if it's all right, I will try to get together with Stacy and get finalized portion of this, and then I've got several comments to make to Tracy as well. So again, I apologize for having to leave in the middle of your presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and then this next slide really highlights kind of the main drivers for establishing these rate adjustments, which are net revenue as well as ending reserve balance for the solid waste division. So as you can see on the chart, the dark blue bars represent the total net revenue or the projected total net revenue of the solid waste division. The light blue bars represent the ending reserve fund balance of the division. And then the orange line going across there represents the minimum target fund balance, which this is based on similar financial policies that the other city utilities have followed and adopted in the past. So really just establishing that minimum target reserve fund. One thing to point out, that it's very common for the ending balances to exceed these minimum target lines in preparation for future projects or large capital investments. And so that's the case with Rapid City, where the ending balance for 2025 is going above this target line in preparation of a large cell expansion project that falls just outside of this forecast window in 2026 and 2027. So that reserve fund really needs to be built up in preparation for that large capital project. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stacy to kind of wrap up the presentation portion, and then I think we'll move into some questions after that.
Thanks, Luke. I guess just to kind of reiterate, the objective is to maintain the same level of service for our customers. We want to maintain customer service, recycling, continue the recycling program, and the yard waste compost program. So as we've indicated, the master plan has reached a milestone, and our next step would be to move forward with the baseline recommendations. And by doing that, we are moving forward with the rate adjustment recommendation and the financial policies. We would propose to come forward on June 2nd working session with the proposed rate resolution as well as the financial policies for consideration by council on June 7th. In addition to that, wanted to emphasize there are some other actions that will be coming forward in the future at the appropriate time when we have a proposed rollout, I'll say, for phasing out the 35-gallon containers. We've indicated we'd like to do that by 2024, but there will be a more formalized program to accomplish that. That'll be a future action. Phasing out of alleyway collection where feasible and supported by the customers. And I'm going to emphasize supported by customers. We will do this where the customers are interested in moving the facilities out of the alleys. We'd like to transfer the sharps management program to a third-party vendor, continue to collect sharps, but have that service performed by a third party. And then, as we've indicated, implementing a commercial yard waste tipping fee at the time we have a yard waste centralized disposal site. So with that, we are done with our formal presentation, and the team is available for questions.
Thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Jones, I think you had some questions.
Thank you very much. So thank you for this great presentation, you guys. I'm a tad bit frustrated right now. I feel like something as incredibly important as this kind of got into us at the last minute. Has nothing to do with you all. Your presentation is fantastic, and I applaud all the work that was done. So thank you for that. But I'm not pleased as to how this was brought to our attention. But having said that, on, let's see, page 5, the key plan recommendations about co-composting. Does that mean this recommendation says there would be no more of those piles out there that we can go out and fill up our truck with and use for our gardens and use that? Because I know a lot of people use that. Is that what that means?
No, so that product is actually the yard waste composting that residents are able to pick up and utilize in their gardens. The co-composting product was originally intended for use. However, the quality in meeting the testing requirements has been a challenge for that product.
Okay, thank you for the clarification there, because Mrs. Old Lady that I referred to a little while ago getting run over by a scooter, she would be really upset if she couldn't get that stuff for her garden. I can guarantee you that. Next one. May I continue, Mr. Thank
Absolutely.
You. Thank you. So the collection site, as far as for the community use, you recommend one site only, fenced in and staffed, and I've seen these all around town, and a lot of people use these, obviously. So there will be some pushback about why going to only one. But I get it based on your pictures, and I've seen it numerous times. Do you have a site in mind at this time?
At this time, there's not been a site that's formally identified. Again, that would be something we would work on and bring forward at the appropriate time when we've identified a site. it's just part of the recommendation to move towards that. It likely would be on the west side because we're going to maintain the site out at the landfill, the 24/7 site as it's known. So there's really two sites people can use, the one at the landfill, and then we'd find another centralized location.
Mr. Weifenbach and I are both in Ward 1, and there has been a big site by the Harney baseball fields there it's been gone for a couple years now, but that was used a lot. And there was a lot of grumbling when that site went away. And then, but people still put stuff there. But there was grumbling for that. So some people will see this as, gee, I'm paying more and getting less service. But we need to make sure and be able to educate our community as to why this is taking place. I think this is a good idea because of what you presented to us, the contamination of the product and the mess and all that. Then if I may go on, because I'm kind of on a roll here, then I can be done. The tipping fee for commercial loads of the yard waste, et cetera, I didn't know that they weren't paying at this time. So they are? Well, the slide on page 6, inundated by large commercial loads. So are they paying a fee right now?
Not for tree branches or commercial yard waste.
Okay.
Currently, no.
So yeah, that definitely needs to be there. Everyone needs to pay their fair share. And then, thank you for allowing me to keep going here. The yard or the alley pickup was introduced to the citizens here, I think, a couple years ago as something that was going to happen, and it didn't go over well at all. And so I think they would want to be very, very careful as to how that was approached. And then my final comment, Mr. Evans, or Alderman Evans, Nordstrom, and myself had a fantastic tour of the solid waste facility on the south edge of Rapid City. And they showed us the MRF, they showed us everything. And they talked a lot about the recycling and how, if more people would recycle, it would keep the prices steady, because that's genuine income for the landfill, right? A lot of the recycling that takes place, that's what they told us at that time. So if more people would recycle, it would be better off for the city, and I wish people would. But thank you, this is a great plan, well done. And the gentleman from Sioux Falls, whenever you come from Sioux Falls to Rapid City, crossing the river, you lose 5 years in age. So that may be why you look so young and spring fresh today. You'll get it back when you go east. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. Mr. Weifenbach?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Jones, I just had a follow-up.
Absolutely, please.
Councilmember Jones, I was just going to reference the drop sites and the concern that you raised in terms of centralizing down to one. One of the aspects of the city's program that should be emphasized based on my experience is you'll provide comprehensive curbside collection service, as Luke laid out and as Stacy talked about, to be providing curbside collection of refuse, recycling, and yard waste. I know that's not the same as drop sites, and some folks prefer the drop sites, but the comprehensive service you provide via curbside is part of the message, I think.
And that is very awesome that takes place, and that's not the case everywhere. So,
That's right.
Good point. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I got the pleasure of serving on this committee. It was one of the funnest ones that I've been on, because the stakeholders that they picked were people, real stakeholders in the community. There was a fellow by the name of Chad from Sanders. I mean, very vocal. Nobody held back on any means. They had a lot of their frontline people there, and so they input. And so, yes, Mr. Jones, we talked about, raising prices is not going to be popular, but I can trust you now. If there was more of the council people here, I'd spend more time in talking about how some of these things came about, because that was one of the biggest concerns that we talked about, was the fact that they're going to have to be raised. There's no doubt about it. Someone in their infinite wisdom previously chose to cut the rates, knowing that was going to be an issue. And at that time, I wasn't on the council, but I raised heck about it, because you can't do that. These guys got a golf ball coming down at the garden hose. Well, guess what, gentlemen? The golf ball is now coming out of the garden hose. So there's no doubt, and these rates were a lot less than I thought would be substantiated by what they got going on out there. They have a lot of capital improvements that have been set aside. They've got some buildings that they're basically obsolete. I don't know. They got guys that are working on this heavy equipment out in the elements. If it breaks down, they got to go out in the elements and work on this stuff. It's crazy. The sites, I'm hoping that when we consider these sites, that we remove that site from the baseball field, from the multi-million dollars that we spent on a gorgeous baseball field that's got a dump site in the parking lot. It's something that bothering me.
Multi-use.
Yeah, it's a multi-use, there's no doubt about it. But so we did spend a lot of time taking the services that they reduced. They really thought those through. They really thought those through, because that's how they ended up with a price increase here versus a price increase here. And that's what this council, which we're short of a little bit now, needs to understand. Unfortunately, gentlemen, we should have probably had you guys on your own docket. I know we got some things coming up next week that don't even deserve the time that you guys need, for this is a big deal for the city. This affects everybody in our city. And not only does it affect everybody in our city, it affects people in the outlying areas, because they're going to have to pay more and they're going to have to adjust. You know, people that have their garbage collected in Hill City, and that was what was nice about it. We had a gentleman there that owns the business, and he was very vocal about how we approach this. How do we look at these things? They went to deep and look at things like the smaller trash cans. It's not the problem of having a smaller trash can. It's the problem of having a smaller trash can when you have equipment that's made to, you know, get the bigger cans. And so if you get a small can, the small can falls into the truck. The driver's got to get out of the truck, climb up on the truck, and retrieve the can. So you can see the issues that they have there with workman's comp, all these types of things. So they've really spent a lot of time, and I'm going to make this presentation again because it was important for us that we worked it from both sides, not just said, you know, here you go, because I know it was mentioned to me that, you know, we've been that way before. We've had to raise the fees. And I said, yeah, but they've never been approached in this manner where you say, hey, here's why we did it, and here's what we did. We squeezed on this side to get rid of some of the co-composting that didn't make any sense anymore. They couldn't get rid of the plastic. It's costly. Recycling, unfortunately, is costly. It's not a money-making issue. It actually probably cost the rate holders money, but intrinsically, it's worth the value to do that. We talked about grinding, and that's another thing I want to bring up, because we talked about having another grinder, but there's not money there to buy one. But if you have another grinder, you can save X amount of dollars on the volume that's packed into those cells, because it crushes it up smaller, puts it in there, so you'll get actually an extended life on the landfill that we have currently. None of that was taken into consideration when they cut the fees back then. It was, you know, it was unfortunate, but it's what we're dealt with right now, so we're going to deal with it. So you're right, we need a lot of education on looking at the alleys. When they talked about the alleys, they realized that just carte blanche taking the alley trash away wasn't going to work. There's people that need it in their alleys. It's the only avenue that they can get it out of. So they had all those conversations, and if there was more of us here, I'd go into more of it. But you have great questions, and these guys have been through it all. They can answer anything that comes up like that. So, but when we go to the public with the rate increase, we've got substantiation. These guys put the work and the effort into going, how can we be more efficient and keep that price increase down? And I still have some concerns on whether we can meet some of the capital improvement, and I'll ask you about that later, about some of the trucks and some of the equipment that need to be replaced. My concern is about getting another grinder to actually put more volume into the ground, and then the shops that these guys are working in. So, and I'll ask you at a later date when the rest of the council's here, so they could hear what I have to say. I wished we would have had this. I didn't realize this was coming today. I missed the last meeting because of personal reasons, but it's a really good summary of what we all talked about and the energy that you guys put into it, and all the people that were.
It's terrific work, and these aren't the pretty things. Sorry, Chair. These aren't the pretty things that, you know, people like to do and talk about, but they're the core vital services that we are mandated to provide to our community. And if we don't do it right, and if we don't do it right now, then people are going to pay the price down the road. We are cleaning up messes of previous councils, and that happens. But, you know, we're starting to talk more and more about doing things right, doing things right. Dale talked about the other night about if we're going to acquire this new police station, we've got to talk about right-of-ways or road.
Mr. Jones, excuse me, Mr. Roberts, would you mind if he jumped in?
Huh?
Mr. Roberts and
Oh.
Mr. Solomon both want to jump in here.
Would I mind? Well, jump in, Johnny.
No offense, but I've been in
Sorry.
the queue and we went to police stations.
Sorry,
So I've never seen Mr. Weifenbach so excited about being on a committee in my life. I am offended, though, because I did vote to decrease those rates. I'm just kidding. Nothing offends me. You know that, Ron. I never in a million years thought when we decreased those rates that we wouldn't bring back a rate increase for 8 years. You know, I know that, and I've been a proponent over the years over increases in, you know, different areas, including solid waste, and I remember, just as Ron remembers, the fight that we had when we moved that yard waste facility, and the people were in an uproar. And I know that my constituents are going to be in an uproar. That doesn't mean I don't support what you're proposing. I think it's a wonderful idea. I think the location needs to be right. I do have a location in mind, Mr. Weifenbach. We need to talk, and I would love to talk to you in the committee. But I use our drop-off site quite frequently. I take cardboard to it probably once a week or so, take my yard waste to it. One question I have about yard waste is there are times, like right now, I'm in the process of trimming bushes and trees at one of my rental properties, so I'll have a dump trailer. So do I become a commercial hauler at that point when it's no longer in my truck and it's in my dump trailer? This is curiosity more than anything.
Yeah, that is. That's a good
So, you know, and I could do 2 loads in my truck, but it's more convenient. You know what I mean? I mean, there's just different things in there that I think we do things, we never think about the unintended consequences on it. You know, we never think about, well, we do, we just don't really a lot of times follow through on them. But I think this is a great idea. I think it's a great proposal. I think it's a great idea standardizing basically most of the dumpsters that, you know, I mean, when you have a bunch of different things out there, it's hard to have a fleet that can handle everything. You know, I understand, definitely understand that. I think that even though I didn't support this study, from what I see, it's a good idea. There's a lot of good ideas being brought forward. You know, whenever we look at a rate increase, get ready, because your phones are going to explode, your emails are going to explode. But again, it's the cost of doing business. We have wonderful service. You know, I just put out my grass clippings this morning to be picked up. You know, there's very few places around the country that you can do that. So I do appreciate the service that we get in Rapid City, and I think most people do. And good service, you've got to pay the price. So anyway, that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Say, Lance, I'm just going to chime in a little bit. It is just a stepping point, like you said. So they've got, over the whole conversations that they had, they just got very few recommendations for us to work on right now, and obviously it's going to be a work in progress moving forward. But those are great questions, and the rest of the council needs to weigh in on those questions. So, and
unfortunately, most of them have left.
That is
right,
true.
they are. I don't
actually
even,
under a quorum.
Actually, don't even realize that sometimes because I talk too darn much.
Mr. Solomon, did you?
Yeah, thank you. Good questions, good comments. Appreciate y'all taking the time. One of my observations, this is kind of anecdotal, but it goes along with the alleyway, watching a truck go through the alley, having to try to turn around to go back through the alley. I saw it happen, and I thought to myself, this is just one alley, not mine. I don't have an alley, but that the inefficiency, which they didn't ask for, and I think picking up in an alley is great, but that couldn't we, instead of having to back around, could everybody put it on that day, put it on the same side so they can just pick up and zip on through, or whatever the case. So can you talk to me, do you have smaller trucks in mind for alley pickup, or is it by exceptions only? What kind of things are you thinking of when it comes to the alley conversation?
Sure. I'll start with the answer and feel free to piggyback off of my response. But in regards to the alleyway collection, a number of those factors are considerations. So smaller collection vehicle dedicated for alley collection is one of those options. Identifying, and the city team, Josh King, collection supervisor, and his team have gone through a lot of work to identify specific areas where it's just safety, flat out safety concerns for either backing into those alleys or, like you were saying, having to go through and turn around and go back through the same alley to collect the carts on the other side. And so we've looked at ways to move carts to all one side of the alley. And so all of those things are in the plan, and once there's a official rollout of that phasing, it'll be a combination of a lot of those considerations.
And by the way, it's by no means a critique. I think it's like, I feel bad that they have to go through that. What part of snow removal is anything with the garbage collection? Is there anything that we can do better in the winter months to help them speed up and not be delayed so much? Does that play a factor with weather? Is that a question for Mr. Barber?
What was that question again?
Well, curious about snow removal with collections. Does it coordinate well? Is it an issue? We're talking about efficiencies and those sort of things.
It's like getting our hills sanded, before we get out there in the mornings. There's some days that we have to redo our routes so we can get some weight on to make some of the hills in the hilly areas. The alleys get pretty bad because they don't get plowed. We got a plow truck on a pickup that we will, if it gets bad enough, we will go down and hit some of the alleys and things like that on our own just to get through them. Or sometimes we have to wait a day to get back through them, so they're beaten down a little bit. But we adjust our routes accordingly just to get it done.
Okay.
So some help would be greatly appreciated.
Oh, sure. I'm sure you know a guy who knows a guy, but yeah, same boss. Well, it's tough because it's when the weather comes, those alleys are not easy to remove snow from or anything, I can imagine, because they're not a typical street that has a lot of challenges that come along with them. But I think this is just a good example of us getting back to basics. We kind of started talking about this with surplus funds, and as we look at all of our needs, which are significant, we really need to look at what is the city here for, and should we just focus on doing that the best we can before we tackle every other issue in the world. And it's a municipal challenge. We don't have a lot. We don't get a lot of property tax revenue like other agencies. We're heavily dependent on sales tax revenue. My last question, I thought about this with the cardboard and the central and the drop-off, which is where that ends up is going to be a very big deal. But with the multiplication of online shopping and all of the cardboard boxes and those sorts of things, what kind of impact has that had on our operations as well as our drop-off locations? I know I go to drop off cardboard boxes too, and it's usually a game of Tetris for me to try to squeeze in a couple of. I flatten them, but still a challenge. So,
Mr. Chair, council member, it's called the Amazon effect. Surprise.
Amazon.
So it certainly you've seen an increase in the quantity of corrugated, both at at your drop-offs, and then there's an increased interest by many communities as far as how to deal with it at curbside, right? As you said, because you're getting it at home. I think from a market's perspective, it's one of the most consistent markets in terms of baling it and selling it. And so to continue to collect cardboard, as you would imagine, based on your intuition, is a good idea, and it can be handled pretty well. And it's probably one of the core materials of your recycling program.
Because what I love, we need to solve challenges, but we also have to pursue opportunities. So if there's opportunity for us to harvest more of that cardboard, that means making it easier to get it. So I would think anything we do with drop-off sites or collections in general, whatever the strategy is for that, what can we increase participation on? I think obviously making it easier is going to have a big impact as well as education. So I won't belabor this. I know there's only 5 of us, just some curiosity. I appreciate the discussion, appreciate you taking the time and all of the work, and as well as the committee members who are part of that. Got a lot of decisions to make, so appreciate the info.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones wanted 5 seconds. You can have it.
Thank you. I want to apologize to Councilman Solomon and Roberts for going too long when you guys were buzzed in. Very sorry. And to Dale Tech, I was referencing you because you are so good at making us think about we need to do stuff for the future, not just for the moment. So that's what I was trying to reference. So it didn't come out very well, but I appreciate the fact that you do that for us because it's vital. 5 seconds are up. Thank you.
Dale, go ahead.
Closing comments. I just want to take the opportunity to thank certainly Burns and McDonnell, Alan Anderson, Ron Weifenbach, everyone that's been involved in this all along the way. I've purposely stayed out of it and let the people do their work without a lot of this is the first time I've seen it. So I guess the last comment I want to make is we do this to look ahead. We do this to provide a good service to our community at the cost that it costs. We're not asking for more than that. So congrats to everyone that did a great job on this, and we're looking forward to having further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tech, and thank you guys for presenting today. It was a pleasure working with you.
Thank you.